come to the end. We've come to an end. It's the end of an era. It's the beginning of a new era. My hope for the future is in young people. I work in a university, and I'm really believing and hoping that 18 to 24-year-olds who are so sick of the way we've organized the world and the ways that we've failed them will pick up the pieces after COVID and find a way for societies and communities and families and cultures to work better, find ways to work across cultural borders, find ways to leave discrimination and hatred behind, find ways to heal. I believe in them.
And that's it down.
Is it going?
Mm-hmm.
My question is, in case of doubt, who will be rescued when the worst comes to the worst, and who will not? Triage. There's always a triage, and it's not necessarily with the pandemic. It's not with the flood or the hurricane or the political storm. It's not with who gets the last piece of cake. There's a triage because you're taller. There's a triage because you're richer. There's a triage sometimes because you're smaller. There's a triage because sometimes you're lucky. There's no rhyme or reason. It's true, however, that money will help you. So the rich will probably be the last to be decimated from the planet. However, their deaths will not be pleasant. It'll be ugly because they'll be holding on to their candelabras and their Picassos. They'll be holding on to their money and their wallet and their bank accounts that are empty and worthless. We like the rich. We think they're great. They're patrons of the arts. And they think because, and they're probably rightly so, they've invested so much in culture that they can avoid the facts of nature. We'll see what happens.
What is the worst thing about the pandemic for you? I think the hardest thing, hardest thing about the pandemic for me is learning that there are certain things that are unchangeable, and learning about accepting the unchangeable in terms of politics, in terms of there are arguments you will never win and minds that you will never win over, and also in terms of personal relationships, of accepting we've seen the most gruesome of people, and accepting that ugliness exists, and learning to coexist with the ugliness, I think, is maybe one of the worst parts about the pandemic. Yeah.
So, yes. My question was, is life today different than 6 months ago? And that's an interesting one because you can just say yes or no, but you can also think in terms of what is life? Is that an internal question? Is that an external question? Has my external setting changed? Has my internal setting changed? Has my feelings changed? Have my circumstances changed? Money, life, relationships? Obviously, it's an immense question that can also be answered with yes or no. So of course the answer is yes, like for everybody. But for me, the answer would be more internally rather than externally. As I come from a privileged sort of circumstances, I can maneuver the external not to be too affected. I mean, yes, I have less jobs, and yes, I have less this and that, but in the end, life is still okay. But internally, it definitely has affected me, that the little pieces of thoughts that I had before, how this world should not continue, how my life and the attitude towards things should not continue, definitely has been triggered by this pandemic, whatever this pandemic is. So it triggered in terms of how I should rethink life internally, and what this little stretch of time I have within my life, what that should be, and how I should sort of thread, that string that makes life. So internally it has changed a lot, and definitely I'm trying to step back a little bit in terms of the individual and step forward towards a little bit what is the continuation of this world, which is a little bit less humans and a little bit more global thinking. So I think so the answer is yes.
The question that shows, what is your hope for the future? The pandemic stopped me from going to a place where I was hoping to investigate a different type of future, a future in possibly India, which is inspired by a philosophy which focuses on an entirely different set of values compared to the environment where I'm currently living. So I was hoping to find some answers there, and the hope for the future would be a future where we focus on consciousness, being more aware, being more conscious. And from a lot of people I heard that they use the time to do exactly that, to recalibrate, to soul search, to concentrate, to meditate, to search for clarity, and so my hope for the future that we do more of that.
Okay, cool. My question is, what did lockdown do to your friendships? I was confined with my partner and my best friend, or my best friend from high school, and we weren't meant to be confined together. She had come visit before confinement, and then she got sick and confinement happened in France, and so she stayed with me. And right before that, I had been going through a phase of inviting everyone and anyone to stay with me, and I had finally realized right before she came that I needed to set more boundaries. And then she came, and then she was confined. I was like, she's only coming for a week, it'll be fun, then she's leaving, and then we got confined together. And it was really fun, but it was really, really, really hard. And we didn't argue or fight, and there wasn't even tension. I think we both are pretty good at enjoying each other and keeping our own problems for ourselves and thinking about them before we bring them to the table, bring them up. But on the last day, when I was driving her to the train station, we kind of agreed, I agreed with myself that I needed a long break, and so since then we haven't spoken, but not in sometimes when you say we haven't spoken, people say, oh my gosh, you had a fight, and it's not like that. I just sort of said to her, I need a lot of space, and when we're ready to talk again, we'll come back and we'll talk again, but for now, I just need to be far away and not have to think about you in any positive or negative way, so that later on we can talk more. So that was very strange. COVID made me basically break up with my best friend temporarily, and then also at the same time it made me connect with a ton of people that I hadn't connected with in a long time. I got so many letters in the mail from people. I was like, oh my gosh, what? Okay, I didn't know that I mattered for you. And so it was really interesting because I feel like at once this very deep friendship was unrooted, and then all of these other more peripheral friendships became incredibly deeply rooted and were more of a support system. So it really reshifted my idea of what friendships can look like and how they maybe go through more cyclical motions than I thought, and it's not just linear and you have your closest friends and they're always your closest friends, and then you have peripheral friends always. It really showed that it's more of a cyclical motion, so it was very interesting.
Sit down.
Läuft das wirklich?
Ja, das ist der Punkt. Sit down.
Hier?
Mhm.
What surprised you most during the pandemic? Well, I was surprised how deeply I changed, how massively my perception of the world changed, and I'm really thankful that this rupture brought me to new ideas, new insights, and new possibilities. Yes, that's it.
Thank you. Alright. Cool. Alright.
You're the next in line.
How does the virus shape our living together? I'd say we're not really living well, I guess, people who were living together live together. Still, I was kind of thinking of it as like if I was in a relationship I didn't want to be in, be awful, and obviously that's the thing. I don't know. I feel like it's a lot of longing. So it's sort of like people thinking about how they're gonna live together later, who they want to live with, trying to live with themselves, whatever, But I mean, I feel fucking mad antisocial, but also I think it's from a deeper kind of like, like you can't hang with anyone, so, and it sucks to be on the frickin' phone. But I mean, that's the thing too, I guess, doesn't always suck. But the virus makes it, I don't know, you think about it, I definitely have been talking to my friends more, thinking about talking to them, or just thinking about getting back to them, or to people, or to togetherness. But I think loneliness is a kind of togetherness. And obviously I've been with my fam, that's been nice. I don't know, I guess you get locked down and you have to live together with whoever that is. Or even if it, and that's best case scenario, I guess, is if you can live somewhere. And I had a good time with my fam. Anyway, I think the virus, I don't know, lots of longing. Everyone's lonely. I'm lonely, I don't know. I'm not that lonely. I'm always lonely.
So the question that I'm going to talk about is the one about how did it change your life, confinement or COVID. And I found it incredible to have a pause in my life, to have this gigantic pause button, and to be quiet and still, and I was able to hear things I couldn't hear and take the time, and I realized that what I had planned for myself, my future, what was supposed to be happening now was this kind of frenetic paced craziness. I was taking all these trips and doing all this work and all this fundraising and kind of right up to the edge of impossible, and I would have been miserable, and that would have been my life. And suddenly I found myself in this incredibly beautiful place. I recognize how lucky I am to be here in Provence, but it was the realization that these are the days. This is your life. This is it. And how you spend these days is how you spend your life. And I started to think, I basically started to think I need to change my life. I need to be more like this, quiet and calm and not seeing too many people, not doing too many things. I love that I didn't have to make an excuse to not go to a dinner party because nobody asked me. I love that I didn't have to feel guilty or obligated. I had just days. I would open my calendar and there would be nothing. And I had time to actually think, which I hadn't had that kind of time in so long. It was bliss. It was actual bliss. And there was a kind of cognitive dissonance with the bliss knowing the suffering all around me, and then thinking that's kind of how life is always. There's this great suffering all around us, and there's this great joy all around us. And, how do you reconcile that? How do you not die of grief? How do you remember always the joy? So that's what I learned from COVID and how I think, and I hope I can take that forward into the future. I'm not sure yet if I can, but it's a work in progress.
So, for the question that I wanted to first answer, which is, with whom could you best laugh together during the lockdown? And I would have to say the person that I could laugh with where I was in the kind of present moments was a neighbor named Martine, who was determined to. I think my neighbors were concerned that I was going to get fat, and so I had one set of neighbors that would take me out one day a week, and they would say, "Oh, it's just going to be an hour or so," and then we would be gone for at least 2 hours. And then my neighbor Martine, who usually lives alone, but lives an extremely minimal existence with her constantly decreasing set of chickens and her horse. And Martine would just take me to these crazy hikes, but they would go half a day, and she would take me into what I could only think at the time as like a different universe, because I was truly rediscovering, I guess where I've been quite literally for 5 years. And during this time, we would make each other lunch and we would tell funny stories, and we could discuss our the things that made us angry, or who's pissing us off, and that I really appreciated, because not only is she sharing this kind of very intimate, she has such an intimate relationship with the land, that it was such a privilege that she was sharing it with me to begin with, but that at these certain occasions we could both kind of despite my faulty French, we could relate on this very human level and find the absurdity or the common experience in certain things. And that made me really happy.
Okay, dann lasse ich dich allein.
My question is, what surprised most about what surprised most about you during the pandemic? It was this changing of feeling. Actually, when it started, we didn't know what's going on, and that main feeling was fear or things like waiting and I had this sensation when I arrived in Ménerbes in a very critical situation, and when I went out doing a promenade in the forest, and suddenly all fear fell away from me. It was just so wide feeling, so thankfulness, so gratefulness, and just it opened my eyes to the beauty, every single detail, every single plant, every single color, every single bird was present, cadeau.
And there you go.
Okay. And do I still clap as it says here?
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. My question that I received was, what would happen if Corona had been a computer virus? And it occurred to me that if it would make a difference for people's computers, they probably would wear a mask.
Yeah, the other question is, what surprised you, or what surprised them most about themselves during the pandemic? And I would say that what surprised me most is that despite having left the United States for a considerable period of time, sometimes I think the longest I've been away from the United States is maybe 2 years. I think what surprised me most is that the entire kind of way of thinking in the United States, well, it didn't come to a screeching halt because some people are fucking idiots, but whole throbbing metropolises, like New York City, for example, came to a screeching, horrifying halt. And that both brought out what surprised me most is that I think people internationally are finding this, I'm sure, but I think what surprised me most is that Americans, I think, have come to realize that what they have pursued, or what they have been told to pursue for their entire lives, is quite nearly like someone else's propaganda, right? The things that we need, the clothes that we need to wear, the context that we have, the context that we don't need. Work relationships, especially, and who would have thought, right, that so many millions of Americans would be forced to stay at home. And as discussed at the COVID dinner right now, at dinner, that is, right now people in the United States are experiencing the horrid consequences such an inept system, but really, whereas Americans are so good at or being told and following kind of the direction, right, of kind of saving face, of keep going, keep moving, keep working, that right now, I mean, the fault lines, there's nowhere to go, right? There's nowhere for Americans, there's no way for Americans to move. And that I find truly shocking, that, and we will see in coming weeks, if the United States decides to save itself or really descend into such mass misery that it as a part of the human experience, it is I have faith in the people that I know. I mean, that people in the United States to kind of get their shit together and pull together in some kind of real way. But what do you do when the system that you've been working toward for, your entire family has been working toward for, decades, centuries, is disintegrates. So we shall see. And I don't know what that means. And for me personally, I think when somebody, I had a question about what COVID would bring in terms of the future. And I think I'm jealous of that question, so I want to answer that question too. In that, despite being the confinement brought out the element that I've realized just kind of how isolated a life I've led, and with both good and bad outcomes, but also that that I realized that I felt a sense of urgency, not only about using my brain so that I wouldn't somehow kind of devolve, right? I mean, daily walks can do a lot, but they can't really, they're not using your brain for you necessarily. And so I wanted to do that, and so I did a bunch of German for about a month and a half, but with the goal of, despite the environment around me, I felt that I really needed to pursue an active, vibrant community, and not just kind of sipping rosé vibrant, but really engaged with as many people as possible of all different varieties, and to begin to work again. And that I think I've spent the last, since March, pursuing that actively, and we'll see what happens. extraordinary and a terrifying time to be alive. So